This is the World News on AIT. I am Sadia Tudusumu. Welcome. Global oil and natural gas prices soared Thursday after Iran attacked a key natural gas facility in Qatar that can supply 1/5 of the world's gas, as well as 2 oil refineries in Kuwait. The attacks added to fears the energy crisis triggered by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz to tanker traffic may be longer and more extensive than feared, with lasting damage to oil and gas production.
Brent crude, the international benchmark, rose to $116.38 per barrel, up from under $73 per barrel on the eve of the war. The European TTF benchmark for natural gas prices traded 24% higher on Thursday. The Iranian attack hit the Ras Laffan terminal for shipping out liquefied natural gas to Qatar. Qatar normally supplies some 20% of the world's consumption of LNG, which can be carried by ship. The facility shut down after a drone attack. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz to most tanker traffic also left the gas with nowhere to go. If the disruption from Iran's attack on its Gulf Arab neighbors' energy infrastructure keep oil and gas prices high for long, they could create a debilitating wave of inflation for the global economy. U.S. benchmark crude oil gained 1.1% to 96.45 a barrel early Thursday, while the Henry Hub future contract, the benchmark for U.S. natural gas, gained 5.1%. As oil and gas prices spiked, world shares retreated and U.S. futures edged 0.2% lower. Germany's DAX lost 2.1% to 23015.40, and the CAC 40 in Paris fell 1.5% to 7848.88. Britain's FTSE 100 shed 1.7% to 10134.02. In Asian shares trading, Tokyo's Nikkei 225 fell 3.4% to 53372.53 as the Bank of Japan opted to keep its benchmark interest rate on hold at 0.75%, citing the war with Iran as one factor. In its monetary policy statement, the BOJ said that in the wake of increased tension in the Middle East, global financial and capital markets have been volatile and crude oil prices have risen significantly. Future developments warrant attention. Higher oil prices are a heavy burden for Japan, which, like South Korea and Taiwan, depends on import of most raw materials for industries that rely heavily on oil and its derivatives. The KOPSE in Seoul lost 2.7% to 5763.22. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng slipped 2% to 25500.58, while the Shanghai Composite Index shed 1.4% to 4006.55.
European leaders doubled down Thursday on refusing to join the United States and Israel military campaigns in the Middle East as they meet in Brussels to grapple with rising oil and gas prices caused by the war. European leaders have deflected entries from the United States President Donald Trump to send military assets to secure the Strait of Hormuz, a key waterway for the global flow of oil, gas and fertilizer. However, rising energy prices because of the war and fears in Europe of a new refugee crisis have pushed leaders to make the Middle East a priority at the summit. The summit was initially expected to center on overcoming Hungary's opposition to a massive loan for Ukraine, but the conflicts in Iran and Lebanon reset the agenda. European leaders have no appetite for joining the war. European leaders have been deeply critical and have offered it. Britain is a fallout, refusing And Europe to join in the United States and Israel military campaign in the Middle East. President Bola Tinubu has today met with United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer in a high-level bilateral engagement aimed at strengthening ties between Nigeria and Britain. The meeting comes on the second and final date of President Tinubu's state visit to the United Kingdom. Today's meeting culminated in the signing of various memorandum of understanding and agreements, including those on trade, investment, defense, and cultural cooperation. AIT's Jomo Sama, who is in the UK, has more. We'll bring you the reports in the course of this bulletin. Now, moving ahead, the South Pass natural gas field, which came under attack this week, is part of the world's largest sought field and an energy lifeline for Iran. Israel's attack on the field prompted Iran to target energy infrastructure in other Middle East countries in response, sending news shockwaves across and beyond. The Iran war has dealt a massive energy shock to the global economy by choking off most exports of crude oil and liquefied natural gas through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has also attacked ships and key export facilities in its Persian Gulf neighbors, putting more upward pressure on energy prices, even though its Gulf neighbors, Saudi, Qatar, Oman, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates are not taking part in the U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran. Hours after Wednesday's attack, U.S. President Donald Trump said that Israel will not attack South Pass again, but warned on social media that if Iran continue striking Qatar's energy infrastructure, the United States will retaliate and massively blow up the entity of the field. In the case of South Pass, the target is not Iran's exports, but its biggest source of domestic energy in the country that sometimes struggles to produce enough electricity. The gas field under the Persian Gulf, the world's largest, is shared by Iran and Qatar. It's called South Pass on the Iranian side and the North Field on the Qatari side. Iran intensified its attacks on its Gulf Arab nations' energy sites Thursday, hitting a Saudi refinery on the Red Sea and setting Qatari liquefied natural gas facilities and 2 Kuwaiti oil refineries ablaze as it stalked back following an Israeli attack on its main natural gas field. A major escalation in the Middle East war that has sent global fuel prices soaring. Brent crude oil, the international standard, sparked to as high as $118 a barrel, up more than 60% since Israel and the United States started the war, February 28th, with strikes on Iran.
A ship was set ablaze off the coast of the United Arab Emirates, and another was damaged off Qatar, underscoring the ever-present danger also facing vessels due to Iran's stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic waterway through which a fifth of the world's oil is transported. Saudi Arabia had begun pumping large volumes of oil west to avoid the strait and ship it from the Red Sea. But the security of that route was called into question after Iran's drone hit the country's Samref refinery in the Red Sea port city of Yanbu. Qatar, a key source of natural gas for world markets, said firefighters put out a blaze at a major LNG facility after it was hit by Iranian missiles. Production had already been halted thereafter earlier attacks, but it said the latest wave of missiles caused sizable fires and extensive further damage. Damage to the facility could delay Qatar in getting its supplies to the market even after the Iran war ends. A drone attack on Kuwait's Mina al-Anhadi refinery sparked a fire, but caused no injuries, the state-run Kuna news agency reported. The refinery is one of the biggest in the Middle East, with a petroleum production capacity of 730,000 barrels per day. Shortly after, A drone attack set ablaze the nearby Mina Abdullah refinery, officials said. Authorities in Abu Dhabi said they were forced to shut down operations at East Habshan gas facility and Bab field, calling Iranian overnight attacks on the sites a dangerous escalation. Gulf sides condemn Iranian attacks on energy infrastructure. Missile alert sirens sounded in multiple other areas around the Gulf, and Israel warned of incoming Iranian fire multiple times. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE all denounced the Iranian attacks, with Saudi Arabia's top diplomat saying assaults on the kingdom meant what little trust there was before has completely been shattered. Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abul-Gheit called the attacks a dangerous escalation by Iran. But Iran showed no signs of relenting, with Saudi Arabia intercepting 6 drones in Riyadh, an eastern province, before saying that the Samref refinery was hit. The Saudi Defense Ministry said damage assessment was underway at Samref, a joint venture between the kingdom's oil giant Saudi Aramco and ExxonMobil. In Israel, more than a half-dozen waves of Iranian attacks targeting large parts of the country sent millions of people to shelters. The strikes caused damage to buildings, but no significant casualties were reported. The Iranian attacks came after Israel hit South Pass, the Iranian part of the world's largest gas field located offshore in the Persian Gulf and owned jointly with Qatar. With some 80% of oil power generated in Iran coming from natural gas, according to the Paris-based International Energy Agency, the attack directly threatens the country's electricity supplies. Natural gas is also used to supply household heating and cooking across the Islamic Republic. Hitting the gas field is a clear expansion of the conflict, the New York-based Sofan Center said in a research note. Israel's target selection in this war has heavily focused on the institutions, leaders, and infrastructure. The think tank said it now seeks to inflict additional pressure on the regime by making the living conditions for civilians intolerable. Iran condemned the strike on South Pass, with President Masoud Pezeshkian warning of uncontrollable consequences that could engulf the entire world. Qatar Energy said on X that a missile hit on its massive Ras Laffan LNG facility cost the place early Thursday.
For many U.S. Jews, following current events that these days can be emotionally simultaneously, there is widely shared anger at the upsurge of attacks targeting their communities and deep divisions within those communities over whether to support or oppose various policies and actions by Israel in the conflict-wracked Middle East. Just last week, there was unified condemnation of the attack by a man who drove his pickup truck into a Detroit area, a synagogue where more than 100 children were attending a preschool program. The driver, who had lost family members during an Israeli airstrike in Lebanon, exchanged gunfire with a guard before killing himself, according to the FBI. Jewish author and commentator Peter Bennett also denounced the attack while reiterating his vehement criticism of Israeli policy in Gaza, the West Bank, and elsewhere. Army Spotlight, a CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, has numerous policy differences with Israeli government, yet said she wouldn't ask that we stand with Israel signs to be taken down. And the Chinese province has launched a crackdown on the fentanyl trade, a contentious issue in the U.S.-China relations, arresting 7 people and shutting down more than 200 websites in recent months, a state media reported on Thursday. The announcement came shortly after U.S. President Donald Trump said that he would postpone a highly anticipated trip to China because of the Iran war. Trump has used tariffs to try to pressure China to do more to stem the exports of fentanyl, precious, the chemical ingredient that is to go into the synthetic opium blamed for tens of thousands of overdose deaths annually in the United States.
The Hubei Daily News said in an online report that a fentanyl precursor task force established in December had investigated 22 cases in Hubei province through February. Besides the 7 arrested, a dozen other people have been subjected to coercive measures, which can include being summoned or detained. 4 companies have been penalized, the newspaper said. The official Xinhua news agency issued a similar report. It said the task force had been set up to follow a directive from China's Ministry of Public Security. The operation followed an agreement by China at the end of October to take steps to stop the precursor trade in return for a halving of the fentanyl-related tariff on U.S. imports from China to 10%. 2 people have been arrested in another case in which the suspects are alleged to have set up shell companies for the sale of drugs and chemicals that could be used to manufacture drugs overseas, the report said. Trump, citing the fentanyl issue, put a 10% tariff on China soon after he took office last year and later raised it to 20%. He layered additional tariffs on China and other countries starting in April. China countered with tariffs of its own in an escalating back and forth. The 2 sides announced a 1-year truce and the agreement to roll back the fentanyl-specific tariff to 10% after Trump met Chinese leader Xi Jinping in South Korea at the end of October. Plans were underway for a second in-person meeting in Beijing around the beginning of next month, when Trump said earlier this week that his administration was working with China to reschedule the visit and that he would go in about 5 or 6 weeks, which would be late April.
Congolese and Rwandan officials met in the United States and agreed to coordinate steps to de-escalate tensions in eastern Congo, where government troops are fighting rebels backed by neighboring Rwanda. According to a joint statement, the statement issued by the Congolese, Rwanda, and the United States government said Congolese and Rwanda officials met on Tuesday and Wednesday to advance progress in eastern Congo as peace efforts led by the U.S. and partners including Qatar have stalled and violence continued.
The mineral-rich Eastern Congo has been battered by decades of unrest as government forces fight more than 100 armed groups. The most potent, the M23 rebel, backed by Rwanda. The M23 made an unprecedented advance into the region early last year, seizing key cities as they quickly expanded their presence. U.S. President Donald Trump emerged as a key facilitator as he tried to rally both countries to commit to a permanent ceasefire, while at the same time paving way for American companies to gain access to Congo's minerals, which are critical for much of the world's technology, from jets to mobile phones. Both Congo and Rwanda in this week's meeting committed to efforts that revolve around the agreement that Donald Trump facilitated between the 2 presidents last year. The side agreed to a specific but unnamed measures that will support each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, the statement said. They also agreed to a scheduled disengagement of forces as well as the lifting of defensive measures by Rwanda in defined Congolese territory. Although neither Rwanda nor M23 have publicly acknowledged the presence of Rwandan troops, UN experts have reported evidence of their involvement. Rwanda frames its role as defensive measures to protect its territory from Hutus rebels responsible for the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. The U.S. talks agreed that Congo will make intensified efforts to neutralize democratic forces for the liberation of Rwanda, the statement said. The armed group was formed mostly by Hutus who fled to Rwanda after the genocide.
You're still watching the World News. We'll take a break at this point. When we come back, we'll bring you more reports. Please stay.
I don't understand. Online. When I come begin back and go inside. Madam Johnson, what's it with this? Sugar where order from Oyibo don't land so. You never hear? Here waiting now, busybody. Government don't ban the importation of sugar from outside this country because of our own national sugar master plan. They say make nobody they import packaged sugar from Obodo enter Nigeria again. To make this thing work, government don't open sugar factory for Zaria for Kaduna State and a lorry for Kwara State so that the production of sugar go increase and it go improve.
Sugarcane farmers, they go steal money, they send their children, go better school. Country people, make we support government on top of this national sugar master plan because this thing go increase our foreign exchange money, it go improve our GDP, and it go ensure even the youth will go work, they go see employment thing. This thing, now better thing will go profit you, it go profit me, because now me and you, now it be Nigeria. Make we stop to the chop, buy or sell sugar where come from Obodo Ibo enter Nigeria. So make we support the government to ensure say this thing go work. The National Sugar Development Council carry this better message come.
Thanks for still staying with us. Now, Pope Leo on Thursday summoned Catholic bishops to Rome for a special meeting on ministering to families that takes it as a starting point Leo's strong endorsement of one of Pope Francis' most controversial policies on marriage and divorce. Leo penned a special message marking the 10th anniversary of Francis' 2018 document, The Joy of Love. He called the text an illuminous message of hope that is even more relevant and urgent today as it was a decade ago. It was the release of The Joy of Law immediately sparked controversy because it opened the door to letting civilly remarried Catholics receive communion. A church teaching holds that unless these Catholics obtain an annulment, a church decree that their first marriage was invalid, they cannot receive the sacrament since they are seen as living in sin and committing adultery. Francis didn't create a church-wide pass for these Catholics, but suggested in vague terms and strategically placed a footnote that bishops and priests could do on a case-by-case basis after accompanying them on a spiritual journey of discernment. Subsequent comments and writing made clear Francis intended such a regal room, part of his belief that God's mercy extends in particular to sinners and that the end use isn't a prize for the perfect but nourishment for the weak. Now to a bit of sports. The UEFA Champions League delivered thrilling action across Europe on Wednesday as teams scored at their sports in the quarterfinals. Five-time champions FC Barcelona were the biggest winners of the night. Barca thrashed English side Newcastle United 7-2 with Rafa and Robert Lewandowski scoring a brace each. They progressed with 8-3 aggregate victory. Barcelona will now face Atletico Madrid in an all-Spanish quarterfinal clash. Atletico advanced 7-5 in aggregate despite a 3-2 defeat to Tottenham Hotspur on the night. Elsewhere at the Anfield, Liverpool FC breezed past with a 4-0 victory, overturning a 1-0 first leg defeat. The Reds will now face the defending champions Paris Saint-Germain in the quarterfinals. Six-time winners FC Bayern Munich completed a dominant double over Italian side Atlanta BC with a 4-0 win, advancing 10-2 on aggregates. They will meet record winners Real Madrid in the last 8. Well, that's the world news on AIT. I am Sadia Tsusumo. Thank you so much for staying with us.